Well, my heart's broken after watching the ending to the final chapter of Sex Education. The show that burst onto our screens in 2019 has now concluded, and what a final season it was. It was gripping, emotional, and most importantly, it bid farewell to all of the characters in a way that they deserved. So give a horse a hug because it will make you feel better. Let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from this season. Here is Sex Education Season 4 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. It's probably best to break this video down by each of the characters as their endings were all so different. Otis and Maeve. Otis and Maeve was the love story that ran throughout the entirety of the show, and it was all essentially building towards a will they or won't they moment, and the harsh reality of it is that they didn't end up living happily ever after together. A brave decision for the show to make, and I respect that. However, what it did do was show the profound amount of impact that they each had on one another's lives, and that they helped each other become the people that they were in the present day, something which was far more valuable than a fling or a short-term relationship. It was true love. With Otis, his arc was focused around becoming the therapist in the new college that he was attending, and he was up against a person called O, a character that I really wasn't a big fan of. This was somebody who already had the client list of the school. But after the back and forth of leaning into the rivalry and then getting stuck in an elevator together, they realized that they were actually a lot more similar than different. And when Otis came second in the vote at the end, he offered it up to O, because he saw that she was in fact a better therapist than himself, and that he was essentially trying to take the very thing that she cared about away from her. It was the very thing that she found comfort in. Otis had a rift with many characters in this season of the show. Ruby, Maeve, O, and even Eric at one point, as he didn't truly understand Eric for who he was and was never forthcoming with certain topics that Eric cared passionately about. But we saw that all of these rifts were resolved right at the end of the season when it closed out. With Otis feeling devastated at the fact that Maeve had chose to go back to the States, but knowing that he had the loving family support that he needed, we saw him see a note by his bedside which Maeve had left him, where it said about how he'd helped her come out of her shell, that she loved him and that there would always be a part of him inside of her because of how much he changed her. Whilst it's sad that they didn't end up together, the sheer amount of love that was there between them was something which was far stronger than that, and almost made it sad but also joyous. It was a strange one when it came to deciding how to feel. When Maeve returned from the States halfway through the season and her and Otis ended up spending the night together, we saw that Otis finally saw through the performance anxiety that he had, and he was able to be intimate with Maeve in a way that he'd never been before. Meaning that on the night before she left, he was with her, and they admitted their true feelings for one another, saying that they loved each other. The line that he said when she was about to leave in the morning, "I'm going to close my eyes because I don't think I can watch you leave," was a line that was utterly heartbreaking to hear. And you could really tell just how much he cared about her and was going to miss her, so it was a very bittersweet ending for Otis. With regards to Maeve, her life was crumbling in this season. She was studying to be a writer and her teacher was against her, which was something that made her question her own ability. She was in a rough patch with Otis and her mother had also died, something which led her to end up back in the UK. But it was once she was back and was dealing with her flaky brother, Otis, who at the time had said that he had spent the night with Ruby and her also being in the town that she always wanted to escape from, she realized that as much as she cared about Otis and that he changed her life for the better, her life was actually better suited to being in the States and making something of herself there. And that's ultimately what we saw. Her roommates in the States sent her story Southchester off to a publisher, and they liked what they read and were interested in seeing more. So it showed that she'd changed so much since that very first season, and that she was now fully accepting of the person that she'd become, and that Otis had also helped her become. Southchester being about her own life was something which was also representative of that too. It's a shame that the both of them didn't end up together, but man, that ride was eventful, and we saw that they did truly love each other, which is what counts. Eric. Eric is hands down the funniest character in the show, and his chemistry with everybody is quite simply amazing. I really enjoyed watching Eric's story in this season because it was all about navigating a space and worrying about what to do. Eric wanted to be baptized, but he was worried because he knew that his sexuality would be something that the church would be against. This was something which was best represented by the visions that he had. This person would come to him and give him signs of what to do. Eric interpreted this as a way of seeing that he needed to be baptized. However, on the day of the ceremony, he stood in front of his church and told them that he was a proud gay man, and that if they accepted him, then he'd be baptized, but if not, then he'd choose to walk away. And in that moment, all but his mother didn't agree with him, and he instead chose to walk away from the community that he once cared so much about. Even after he left, he saw the woman again, and it was his final vision which ultimately set him on his pathway for how his arc would end, becoming a pastor. The person said that the light that Eric emitted would shine so bright that it would light the darkness, meaning that with him as a figurehead of the local church, more people would feel more accepted, open, and become part of the community, ultimately changing the wider mindset. With his pastor going to the fundraiser right at the end of the episode and opening the dialogue and stating that he wanted to learn more and be more open, the right discussions were set to be happening. There was a moment in this season where we saw that Eric and Otis had a rift between them, and this was because Eric felt as though Otis didn't really take much notice in his life that much, and the issues that he would often be struggling with, things such as race and sexuality. But after the pair got back together again, we saw that Otis was like that because he was afraid to touch on those topics, because he didn't feel as though he had a place to speak about them. With the two of them finishing off at Eric's playing video games, it was almost symbolic of the journey that they'd gone on together, being best friends from such a young age to now embarking on the next chapter of their life together. There was a really nice moment in this season where we saw Eric and Adam have a moment together, where Eric was almost proud of how far Adam had come. It was a moment that was wholesome to watch, and it was good to see them go off on good terms, considering it was awkward to start with. Aimee and Isaac. This was the part of the story that I found to be the most wholesome and inspiring out of it all. A relationship that I really didn't expect to blossom so well, but it did. We saw Aimee and Isaac form a strong friendship in this season of the show, and they actually wanted to take things a step further, but didn't, due to being fearful of upsetting Maeve. But whilst they weren't together in that way and were just friends, we saw Aimee still being impacted by what happened to her on the bus a couple of seasons back. But through her love of photography, she managed to find the strength within her to start to process it all and begin to move on. And a lot of that came from Isaac and the kindness and guidance that he gave her. With Maeve revealing that she was fine with the both of them being together, the final time that we saw them, they were in the dark room, and they finally shared a kiss, showing that Aimee had let Isaac in and trusted him enough, showing that they were a good match. The topics. There were many other topics which were covered in this season of the show which I thought were handled so delicately and treated with the respect that they deserved, such as Cal's body dysmorphia and the impact that it was having on their day-to-day life. I've never really seen that topic handled in a show before, and it was something that really allowed you to take a look inside of their mind and see just how much it was impacting them. With their mother becoming more accepting of them, their transition, and the college raising money for them, it was an arc that ended with a positive front. We also saw Jackson dealing with two heavy topics. He found a lump that he got checked out, and we saw him battling with the health anxiety that came along with it, and the very fact that he was worrying that he could end up dying, something which was best represented at the funeral. And we also saw him tracking down his biological father and realizing that they wanted nothing to do with him. With him getting the all clear, it was a positive end for Jackson, and even though his father wanted nothing to do with him, we saw that he had comfort with his mother's. I would say that I thought his story with Cal felt a bit rushed and brushed over, as they never really got the opportunity to reconcile, which I'd have liked to have seen. We also had the story of Vivienne and her suffering from coercive behaviour from Beau, and the fact that he was controlling, manipulative, and didn't trust her in the slightest. So seeing her standing up for herself was something which was inspiring to see. Jean's arc was heavily focused around postpartum depression and the fact that she was finally willing to accept help for the mental health issues that she was facing, which was causing her life to spiral out of control. I think Jean saw herself in Maeve, which is why she was able to empathize with her and the lack of the parental figures that Maeve had, hence why they connected instantly. With Maeve also standing by her sister Joanna and wanting to help her navigate the abuse that she faced when she was younger, we saw Jean's arc wrap up in a positive way, even telling the motorbike man that he was the father of Joy. Plus, we also saw how people of the disabled community were impacted by a lack of care and attention to the most basic of things that needed to change. This was best represented by Isaac and the elevator constantly getting stuck, and also Aisha and the fact that there was no assistance for somebody suffering with audible issues. Two things that were in the show that were symbolic of a wider societal issue. Even though there were a lot of heavy topics that were handled in this show, it didn't feel like any of them were out of place or weren't resolved in a natural way, so I commend the show for managing that. The meaning of the story. For me, this season was all about the acceptance of yourself, your pathway, and your development. It started with many of the characters wanting to be accepted by those around them, such as Ruby with the popular girls, Eric with the members of his church, Adam with his father, Maeve by her teacher, and Otis by the students as the therapist. But as the season went on, we saw that it was actually about forgetting what other people thought, and more about, on a personal level, being able to accept yourself and owning the pathway that you'd go on to forge. For example, Eric turned his back on the church for them to then approach him and want to make a difference. Vivienne spoke up and broke up with Beau. Maeve didn't care as much about her teacher and didn't let one person dictate the future of her life. Ruby embraced those around her and began to fit in, and Otis turned down the opportunity of being the therapist. It was a really nice message for the show to convey, and I thought it was a really appropriate one to have too. Overall review. I thought this season of the show was the perfect way for it to go out. I thought it had all of the emotions that were needed for a finale, and each of the individual stories were gripping enough to keep me hooked throughout the entirety of it. I found myself feeling emotional at certain points, such as during Maeve's mother's funeral, when Adam confronted his father, and also right at the end. It's a show that confronts real-life issues, and it's not afraid to go deep with them either, allowing an emotional response from watching. The performances from all of the cast members were faultless, and they decanted the personalities, behaviours, and traits of the characters well after a long while. Granted, it is weird hearing a 26-year-old Asa Butterfield saying that he's 17 in this show, and it's not the most convincing, but hey, it's not the end of the world. The score in the background was something that I thought really stood out in this season of the show too. During certain moments, there were motifs that would play, and it would draw me in with the scene. It was often a serious one where two characters were expressing how they were feeling during a tense time, but it worked so well. I also think the same about the soundtrack. As soon as it finished, I wanted to find it because the song choices were spot on. One of my most favourite things about this show is the fact that it doesn't exist in a time. It's in a world where there's iPhones but 70s wallpaper, but 90s technology and 80s cars. Where does this world exist? I don't know. But its design is so well thought out, and it was an incredible choice to have it be timeless because it will allow it to live on. It is a shame that this show's come to an end because it's one that's very original in its approach and concept, but I guess we just have to be glad that we got 4 seasons of it and an ending. So, there you have it, Sex Education Season 4 Ending Explained. What did you think of this final season? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.